They're going to talk to us about the Hollywood Jewish community. Please give them a hand.
Well, as longtime residents of Hollywood, collectively, the Melines and Rothschilds have been involved in many aspects of the Jewish community, including Jewish Federation of Broward County, the David Posnack Jewish Community Center, Jewish Family Services, Central Agency of Jewish Education, and Synagogue Life. Each one of us has had a role in one of those, or some in all of those organizations, just to name a few. We want to start with a look at, we're doing Jewish history, but we want to start backwards. No, actually forwards, then backwards. We're going to show you what Hollywood's Jewish community looks like today. Maybe you'll recognize the places, maybe you won't. There is, I know what you're thinking, but there's actually a rule that when you start a new Jewish community, the first thing you build is a cemetery, and I see heads nodding. And why is that? Because it's more eminent that they're going to have someone that's going to need it before the second one, which is education, which makes me smile. Oh, in case you didn't recognize it, this is the Beth David Cemetery on 72nd between Sterling and Sheridan Street, right next to Fred Hunt. If you walk around not far from here, there's a shopping center where you might see this sign, Judaica, and some of us may argue that it's spelled wrong below. It actually is a very large jewelry store. If you park in that same shopping mall, you'll see that there is reserved parking for people who are customers of the Grove. If you don't know what the Grove is, stop in and see it. It is a huge kosher, which is the rule of the dietary law of the Jewish people, grocery store, but it's more than just a grocery store. It's got wines, fabulous wines, anything you want you can find in the Grove. Here's something that a lot of people don't realize. One of the Dunkin' Donuts in Broward County has koshered itself, making it, according to the rules of dietary laws, and you can go in there and buy food that is not containing pork, does not mix meat and milk together, and if you look at the very bottom down there, you'll see what it is, Dunkin' Donuts. If you do keep kosher, you're going to want to buy your foods from a kosher market. And I mentioned the Grove, but I want you to know there's so many more. I pulled up here Kosher Central to show you. It's a very large one on Sterling Road. Most of them are on Sterling Road. And if you need a hamburger, don't go to Burger King, go to HB King. Hollywood Sarah's is a catering, a restaurant rather, and it's a dairy restaurant. There's also meat restaurants. These are just examples. And how do you know if you're going to a kosher restaurant and they're going to observe the laws? You look for this sign in the window. It says that they have been inspected and are approved for you to go into. It's a kashrut certification. And this one is from the Winn-Dixie on 46 and Sterling Road. They have created, as soon as you walk in, the largest kosher section I have ever seen in a public market. I mentioned that education is very important. On 56 between Griffin and Sterling, you'll find a Jewish day school, Maimonides Academy. I think it goes from K through 8, 9. Okay, I think that's it. No? Oh no, I'm sorry. We also have in the Hollywood community synagogues, all different kinds. I'll be talking about them later. B'nai Sfardim on Sterling Road. And we have Young Israel, also on Sterling Road. Perhaps you've seen on Saturdays where the police escort the people across the street. We had Beth Shalom at one time. Okay, we're going into something I didn't want to get into. Okay, so it's the old.
Oh.
Okay. Anyway, I'd like to now flip backwards. Ron, would you join me up here for what we call In the Beginning? Where did this all start? And Ron's going to help me share with you now the history of the Jewish community of Florida. The year was 1763, when the first recorded Jews in Florida came to North Florida, the city Pensacola. It was not until 1821 that the Jewish population at that time, which numbered 30 to 40 people, established a colony in Micanopy, which, if any of you know, is close to Gainesville, where the University of Florida is. Florida became a state in what year? 1845. You got it. It became a state in 1845. How many Jews were there in the state of Florida at that time? Less than 100. The first U.S. senator, I know some of you in here know who that is, was a Jew. His name is on one of our counties. His name was David Levy Yulia. In 1857, the Jacksonville Hebrew Cemetery became the state's first Jewish institution. Remember I said the first thing we built is a cemetery. We're still in the 1800s, 1876, the first Jewish congregation was chartered in Pensacola. That's a synagogue. And there were only, by 1900, there were only 6 additional ones added to that. Ron's going to take you into the 20th century.
First of all, I'd like to thank the Historical Society for inviting us and having this program. We really very much appreciate the opportunity to share all this with you. I also would like to tell you, and this is just speaking for myself, not my cohorts, there's history and then there's revisionist history. So anything that I may say that may be different than the facts as you know them, you're probably correct. In 1928, some Jews moved to South Florida, which was really isolated because of lack of transportation and access. We were mostly, as many of you know, just the barefoot mailman. He had his chance to walk up and down the beaches on the Atlantic coast, and the Everglades was really the main artery for transportation. I mean, really prior to the 20th century. But in 1928, Jews moved for the first time to South Florida. At that time, the population was over 10,000 Jews in the state of Florida, with the overwhelming majority of these people living in Jacksonville, which was really the first and largest of the Jewish centers in the state of Florida. In the 1940s, due to an economic boom in Miami Beach, primarily grounded on their nightlife, on their tourism industry, and the casinos, Miami replaced Jacksonville as the state's largest population. At that time, there were now by the 40s, there's some 25,000 Jews in South Florida. Also, because there were military installations in the greater area, that really brought in scores of Jewish men who brought their families and girlfriends down to South Florida. Actually, this may be a little too personal, but I was conceived in South Florida. TMI. I'm not going into any detail. My mother took a train from Cleveland, Ohio, to visit my father, who was stationed more in Central Florida. They were going to have a weekend away in sunny South Florida, and months later, Ronald Rothschild appeared. By 1960, retirees from the Northeast and immigrants from the Caribbean, Latin American countries caused the Jewish population in South Florida to explode. Over 175,000 of us are now living in South Florida. Today, Florida has the 3rd largest Jewish population in the country, with approximately 750,000 Jews living in the tri-county area of South Florida. I'm going to take a moment of personal privilege before I ask Audrey to step up, and that is because Sam and Audrey Meline were, unbeknownst to them, very influential in my growth as a Jewish communal volunteer. We came to Florida in 1974, and at the end of 1974, and by January of 1975, I was already hooked to go to meetings at the Jewish Federation of South Broward. And I'm about 32 years old at the time, I'm a young man, and I go to this meeting, and there is this very handsome young guy with wavy hair and a beautiful handlebar mustache. I'll never forget. And I said, this is kind of cool, because where I came from, Cleveland, Ohio, a very active Jewish community, and the important people in the Jewish community in an established northern community were infinitely older than I was used to seeing here in Hollywood. And Sam and Audrey, from that day, frankly, until the present, have always been role models, not only for Cheri and I, but for many, many people who have been involved in the community. So I really want to thank the two of you for that. And with that spectacular introduction, I'm going to ask Audrey to come up.
I've had the privilege and the pleasure of living with that guy, that handsome guy with black wavy hair and the handlebar mustache for 61 years, 57 of them in Hollywood, Florida. He's light gray now. We have subdued him a little in his behavior, but he's still a lot of fun. Okay, I may cross over a bit. My assignment was to talk about the Jews in Broward County. We went to Jewish life in Florida and then Jews in Broward County, so there may be some crossover, forgive me. In 1910, 5 years before Broward became a county, Louis Brown was the first known Jew to arrive in Dania. Now, Dania was the first of Broward County cities. By 1923, 7 Jewish families were living in Fort Lauderdale. Mo and Matt Katz. They came to speculate in real estate. It's believed that Mo received the first real estate license issued in Florida. The boom reached its peak in 1925. The first Jewish families faced much discrimination, but in spite of this, more Jews arrived, and they built the foundations of the Jewish community. Temple Emmanuel was the first synagogue built in 1937 in Fort Lauderdale. Well, the boom went bust in 1926, but the Jewish community remained. By the second half of the 1930s, there was a surge of tourism and another building boom. Now, no family was more influential in the development of Hollywood than the Horowitzes through their Hollywood Inc. In 1920, Sam Horowitz contracted to build sidewalks and streets for Hollywood. With the building bust, he ended up controlling more than half the vacant land in the city, 2,500 lots. He began building and selling single-family homes, and then he built the Hollywood Mall in 1964. Oh, the Hollywood Mall. I remember wheeling our 3-month-old son, who is now 55, through the Hollywood Mall, and they had a stride-right store. No schlepping down to 163rd Street to buy shoes for your children. I mean, and this was long before I-95. I mean, that was half a day's trip. So we looked around and wondered at this magnificent place. Also moving to Hollywood in 1950 was Abraham Meline. And with his leadership and philanthropy, he played a large role in shaping the Broward Jewish community. He was a property developer and banker, and he created the city of Miramar, which was affordable homes for working people. Sam Friedland built the Diplomat Hotel and Country Club in 1956. He was the owner of the food fair chain of stores. And in 1966, Maynard Abrams was the first Jewish mayor of Hollywood. Notwithstanding all these gains, anti-Semitism and discrimination remained a reality in Broward. Now, David Posnack, another familiar name, moved to Hollywood in 1944, and he went into the produce business, and he prospered. He became involved in philanthropic pursuits, and as a result, we now have the very successful and active Jewish institutions in Davie. The David Posnack Jewish Day School, grades 1 through 12, and the David Posnack Jewish Community Center. And now, I would like to turn this back to Ron, who's going to tell us something about the Jewish institutions in Hollywood.
Without raising hands, I'm hoping that many of you grew up in places up north that had a Jewish community center, so that you have a little bit of background. For those of you that may not have grown up in a northern place that had a Jewish center, Jewish centers are very much like the YMCA movement. I like to say that the Jewish Community Center movement is like the YMCA on steroids. And the reason I say that is it is simply not a place that has a gymnasium exclusively. It is not a place that people congregate for social functions exclusively, but it's really a place where people are accommodated with communal needs. The Jewish community centers historically have ministered to the very young with preschools, have ministered to teenagers to enhance their quality of life in a positive environment, have participated in adult Jewish education for those who wish to partake in that arena, and then ministering to senior citizens by providing meals, providing social activities, and it's really been an all-encompassing movement. When Cheri and I came to Hollywood in 1974, to our great surprise, there was no Jewish community center in Hollywood. I mean, I had known that in terms of the region, Hollywood is a substantial community. This isn't a fly-by-night, Johnny-come-lately location. And we were somewhat taken aback by the fact that we had no Jewish community center here in Hollywood. The community center that ministered to the local Jewish population was in North Miami. And for those that are familiar to the site that is now the Michael Ann Russell, that was the Jewish community center that the people in Hollywood would drive down to participate in. And again, no community center in Hollywood. Well, there was a group of us, I like to call us the Young Turks, one of whom is here tonight, or this afternoon. Barry Weiland was with us since the beginning. Sam was sort of the mid-range Turk. He was kind of caught in between the Young Turks and the Old Turks. And the Old Turks were very resistant to us pushing forward this idea that we needed a community center in our local community. And the primary reason for that is a very practical one. People donated a lot of money to the Michael Ann Russell Community Center, and they had a vested interest. Their children were raised with the only community center in the neighborhood, so to speak, that being the Michael Ann Russell. And so that they were very resistant to the development of a local Jewish community center. Not unlike the Young Turks of our great country, the Young Turks kind of pushed that it was time to be independent of Miami. It was time for us to show that we had a mature Jewish population, a Jewish community that could put a program together that could develop this Jewish community center. So I had the privilege of being one of probably 20, 25 young people, men and women, who who felt strongly that Hollywood needed a Jewish community center. Now, at that time, there was a community center presence in Hollywood, but it was really very minuscule. And thanks to Sam, actually, once again, the Jewish Community Center of North Miami had leased a property on Hollywood Boulevard. All of you are familiar with
Yes.
Dr. D's veterinary clinic. Well, right next door to the clinic, there was a dry cleaning plant. And the Jewish Community Center, again, through Sam's efforts, leased that property, and that really was the start of the Jewish Community Centers of South Broward. We incorporated in 1980, and our goal was really to develop a community center of some magnitude for this Jewish community. At the same time, David Posnack stepped forward and pledged $1 million for the development of a Jewish community center. The thing that was interesting about David Posnack is that he was never married, never had any children, and he grew up in I think it's the 92nd Street Y in New York? Is it 92nd? There's a very famous YMHA, the Young Men's Hebrew Association, which was really the early iteration of Jewish community centers in New York. And I think he might have even been an orphan. For some reason, in the back of my head, David Posnack may have been an orphan. And he wanted to help to provide a place where Jewish people could come and congregate and participate in all these activities I just shared with you a moment ago about the community center movement. The thing that I got a huge kick out of was that David Posnack, unlike many philanthropic donors, only put one string attached to his pledge. For those of you that have ever worked on a philanthropic project, you know that donors are very demanding for the most part, and that I will give you $10,000 so long as you meet this or that condition. And the thing that really impressed me about David Posnack, he had a single condition. He insisted that there be a steam room in the center. And again, the Young Turks basically said, steam rooms, my grandfather went to a steam room in Chicago. I don't need a steam room. I don't need no stinking steam room here in South Florida. It's like, well, just to fast forward again on somewhat of a personal note, the single greatest joy that I got personally from this project, which I'll tell you about in a moment, when it was ultimately built, I sat with David Posnack in the steam room. It wasn't even operational. It was all built, the tiles on the floor and on the ceiling, and it was all ready to go. But he always he was dressed somewhat formally. He wasn't a real informal kind of guy. He had very nice white shirt and pants, and I was dressed all over dressed. And we just sat there in that steam room. I'm getting a little verklempt because he was so proud of the fact that this steam room was in this Jewish community center. And I say that image, if you go to the center today, you will see a picture of David Posnack, as appropriately. But in my mind, the picture of David Posnack in my head is he and I sitting in that steam room. At any rate, going backwards a little bit, that first iteration of the Jewish Community Center in the dry cleaning plant had 171 family units. And we just call them units because there could be senior memberships, solo memberships, family memberships. So there was 170 of these units that started the center. And from the very beginning, we had bigger dreams for a Jewish community center. Well, the old Turks kind of acceded to the fact that it was going to happen, and they insisted that it be in Hollywood. Well, many of us said that while there was a flourishing Jewish population in Hollywood, that this Jewish community center needed to be farther west because the Jewish population predictions were going to support the fact that ultimately the majority of Jews in this community were not going to be living in Hollywood. And there was a faction to build this Jewish community center on 10 acres of land on what is now the rifle range or the shooting range on Sterling. You all go by that many, many times. And again, the old Turks said, yeah, that's good enough. Well, the young Turks, said that it isn't good enough. And we looked west and west and west. And again, fast forward, the land that we purchased, ultimately developed, was on Sterling Road and Pine Island. Well, the truth is, today it's too far east. The land should be 2 or 3 miles farther west, but we ended up where we ended up. I had the honor of being the first president, and I don't share this often, but the main reason that I believe that I was elected to be president, beside the fact that I was still a young Turk, was that the people that I wanted to be president didn't want to take a chance on the failure of this project. And as a young man, you know, we were all a little bit more bravado. And so I kind of look at it, I was the George Washington of the Jewish Community Center by default. But things started getting back online because the second president was Sam Meline, again, a middle grade Turk who could deal with the old guys as well as the young guys. Then we moved on to the project that became what you now know as the Jewish Community Center, the Jewish Federation, the Hebrew David Posnack Center, and there's also a senior living facility on that same site. So we really come a long way. To fast forward, and I'm not good with numbers, so I'm just flipping way ahead, but from that 171 units that we started in the early 80s, today we have over 24,000. I got to see, it can't be 24,000. Wait, last page, I highlighted it. I apologize. Anyway, well, we're over 5,000 units. So you can see that the place has grown. And one thing I need to stress to all of you is, while this is a Jewish community center, we do not restrict this in any way to Jews only. There are members from all religious faiths, from all racial portions of the community. It is really a community center, but we do stress that the Jewish part, the center observes the kosher laws. Saturdays we have restricted activities in deference to the Shabbat. But it really is a center for all the people, and it's something that we really are very proud of, and hopefully for many, many years that it will be an integral part of the Jewish community of Broward County. And with that, I think I'm turning it back to Sam now to talk about another very important institution which became the Jewish Federation of Broward County.
Thanks, Cheri. So, somebody stole my speech. There we are. All right. You're looking at the younger Turk because I was the second president of the JCC, even though I'm the older one. Just so that I know who I'm dealing with here and how much I can lie. How many of you have been in Florida for more than 30 years? How many more than 40 years? Oh, God. Put your hands down. More than 50 years. Oh, I'm in trouble. Okay. For those of you... 80 years. Wow. Give that man a bottle of champagne. 80 years. Okay. Just for those youngsters who don't know what it was like when we came to Hollywood in 1962, picture this. Not a single home on the south side of Hollywood Boulevard, from Orange Brook Country Club, the golf course, out to Lawn Acres. Nothing. Mangrove swamp. No, not a house south side of Hollywood Boulevard. Not a house west of 46th Avenue from Hollywood Boulevard all the way out to Taft, to almost to Sheridan Street. Not a house. Okay. Hollywood Inc. was developing Hollywood Hills when we came. Remember, the model row was Johnson Street, 46th to 35th, to where the hospital was, that two-story bungalow where 2 of our 4 kids were born. So that's what it looked like. There was no mention, there was no I-95. There were the mounds for the overpass on Hollywood Boulevard. No 95, no mall. And Hollywood was just filling in. There was always an older Jewish community in the Lakes District, downtown. And then Hollywood, the Hills became more of a bedroom community for the professional community. Lots of physicians, dentists, attorneys, all those coming in. And there were no social services that these people that came from Philadelphia, Boston, Cleveland, Baltimore, they were used to having established communities. And there was none of that in Hollywood because it was not needed. As the community grew, the demand for more services grew. And that brings us to Federation, or it is the Jewish Federation. Well, every large Jewish community in the United States is an organized Jewish community. It's the umbrella organization for all other Jewish organizations, including synagogues, JCCs, family service, adoption agencies. It provides for the social welfare of the Jewish community in that location. You've got to think of the Jewish Federation, which is not a private club, not a membership organization, no dues, not political, not religious. It's the united way of the Jewish community in every community. And it performs a very important function. It provides for the welfare and the needs of the Jewish community. Now, in '62, when we came to town, the Jewish Federation at the time it was called the Jewish Welfare Board of South Broward. Then it became the Jewish Welfare Federation of South Broward. Then they didn't like the word welfare, so they changed it to Jewish Federation of South Broward. And what was South Broward? Our limitation was Danish South Cutoff Canal in the north, Dade County line in the south, the ocean in the east, and 441. 441, everything west of 441 was unincorporated West Hollywood. That's where my first office was. 6023 Hollywood Boulevard. Anyone remember the Hollywood Clinic on Young Circle? Some patients from there. Okay, they had a West Hollywood office, and I rented 2 8x10 rooms in that Hollywood clinic when I first started. Right across from Lum's. Everyone remember Lum's? Okay, so that was a limitation. Okay, 2 small offices on Harrison Street downtown, and as the population grew and the needs of the Jewish community grew, we needed more space, more visibility. So Ron alluded to the 2838 Hollywood Boulevard, the old cleaning plant. That was my pride and joy. I became the GC that converted that. Why did we need that space? Because as Ron said, there was no place for Jewish kids to meet. So we thought that we would need we'd start with a coffee house. And I converted that 6,000 square foot building with the deal that Federation would take the front 4,000 square feet. We'd have 2,000 square feet in the back for kids to meet, and that started the JCC. So Federation came long before the JCC. Young jerk. Okay, at that 2,000 square feet, out of that started the whole community center movement. The first kosher meal program in Hollywood was served in those rooms in the back. We were operating social services out of 23 different locations across the South County. Okay, so what do we do? What does the Federation do? It provides many services and funds for JCCs, synagogues, Jewish education, teacher education, Holocaust survivors. You know that South Hollywood, South Broward, has one of the largest surviving populations of Holocaust survivors that are living sometimes below the poverty level. And so Federation provides for that. Indigent Burial Society, all kinds of different things. At any rate, to provide all of those services takes money. And once a year, Federation changes its hat and becomes the fundraising organization of the Jewish community. And that's basically, I'm getting the 3-minute warning. It takes me more than 3 minutes to say hello. It takes dollars. So Federation has an annual campaign where it's one Jew asking another Jew to give money to help another Jew. That's the basis. That's what we do. And one of the most important methods of raising funds was what really brought the South Broward and Hollywood Jewish community together was missions to Israel. Israel was the focus. We would take leaders on buses for 10 days, show them Israel, tear at their heartstring, and raise lots of dollars, okay? I'm gonna close one of the major missions that we had with the 25th anniversary, by the way. We were privileged to take the beloved Mayor David Keating and Sarah to Israel, and he had a wonderful time, met with the President of Israel. He was a star. He was absolutely an amazing, wonderful guy. All right. When we first started, there was maybe a few $1,000s that was raised when we first came to town. And 92 cents of every dollar went to Israel. And only 8 cents stayed locally. I'll close with letting you know that last year, the close of last year's campaign, the Jewish community raised $4.5 million. But because of the Jewish Community Foundation, which was the result of Jews leaving legacy gifts, Broward County gave away $13 million in social welfare needs locally nationally, internationally, and in Israel. And we can be very proud of the fact that everybody that is a Jew in Hollywood, in Broward County, is a member, either a recipient directly or indirectly, is a donor directly or indirectly, but it's not a closed club, and everybody is welcome to participate in whatever level you'd like. And now I turn it back to Cheri.
Thank you, Sam. We covered the social needs of the Jewish community, the financial needs of the Jewish community, and I get the honor of presenting the religious needs of the Jewish community. To be a Jew means that you might belong to one of many different types of affiliations. The history of the synagogues in Hollywood starts with Temple Sinai of Hollywood, and I'm going to present these in the order in which they existed. Temple Sinai of Hollywood is a conservative synagogue founded in 1942, making it the oldest Jewish place of worship in Hollywood. In 1943, it moved into its first facility in downtown Hollywood. Prior to that, Hollywood had only had 10 to 15 Jewish families, and they were praying together in their homes. They attracted Jews from other parts of Broward and North Miami, and by 1958 they began construction on their new building east on Johnson Street, of which many of us remember. In 1994, the building was destroyed, and Temple Sinai moved west to its present location at 46th and Arthur Street. In late 1950s, Temple Beth Shalom, also a conservative synagogue, was first located on Monroe Street in downtown Hollywood. By 1971, the congregation saw the need to move to the western suburbs, far before Johnson Street, Temple Sinai. The groundbreaking for their location at 46th Avenue and Arthur Street took place in 1971, and after some financial difficulties, as many of us remember, the synagogue in 1994 sold their building to Temple Sinai, who also saw the need now to move west. Temple Bethel, a Reform synagogue, is located in East Hollywood to this day. It was founded in 1956 and remains on its original location on South 14th Avenue. B'nai Sephardim, right here on Sterling Road, is the oldest and largest Sephardic Orthodox synagogue in Broward County. It was founded in 1970. Its members are descendants of Jews from Spain, Portugal, North Africa, the Middle East, and Latin America. The synagogue's current location is at 3291, as I said, Sterling Road, right up here. Temple Solel on Sheridan Street was founded in 1970 by developer Abe Durbin, and it had a membership of 35 families. Temple Solel was then chartered as a liberal reform congregation in 1971. The congregation then began to grow with approximately 150 families joining after the arrival of Rabbi Robert Frazen. In 1973, the construction of the building at their current location, 5100 Sheridan Street, was begun, and it was dedicated in 1975. The Young Israel of Hollywood, also located here on Sterling Road, was founded in 1981 by a woman who held the services in her own home before their permanent structure could be built. It's now located at 3291 Sterling Road. Young Israel is a modern Orthodox Jewish congregation. Additional houses of worship can be found throughout Hollywood, in homes, storefronts. These include Chabad's, an Orthodox affiliation, and Temple Judea of Carriage Hills, which is conservative. And now I'd like to turn it over to Audrey, who's going to talk about service projects.
We've heard all about the wonderful institutions that we have in Hollywood and surrounding areas. And there are lots of ways to follow the tenets of our faith and to serve people. But the people of our community are inspired by a Jewish concept. and that is the concept of tikkun olam, acts of loving kindness performed to perfect or repair the world and to care for those in need. We can do this on our own, on a one-to-one basis, or we can do it through programs through our wonderful institutions. And a great example of this is the Goodman Jewish Family Service. This comes under the umbrella arm of the Federation that Sam was talking about. Now, counselors meet with and assess the needs of single-parent families, Holocaust survivors, the sick, the elderly, and anyone in need. And they offer guidance, support, and financial assistance to help these people live a happy and productive life. And a proper Jewish burial is always provided for the Jewish deceased. And this happens through our wonderful Jewish Family Service. The newly established Dorit and Ben J. Junaid Food Cupboard provides non-perishable food shopping weekly to needy families. And there's also a delivery service for the homebound. And all of this is accomplished with the help of community volunteers. There are many projects for feeding the homeless. For example, we at Temple Sinai partner with a local Baptist church, and monthly we feed hot lunches and provide bag lunches at the Broward Outreach Center in downtown Hollywood. It's really terrific when the youth groups come and the kids from our synagogue participate in that activity. During the 80s, we had an influx of Russians. Yes, that was the time when the floodgates were open in the USSR, and the Jewish community of Hollywood opened their hearts and their homes to settle families. Most of these people came from Odessa, and we said, why did they pick Hollywood? Well, they loved the ocean, and they loved being near the ocean, and it reminded them of home. We provided apartments, jobs, clothing, food, and caring for all the needs to help them become productive citizens of Hollywood and elsewhere. And how thrilling it was for us personally when one of the families, one of those who had made it, moved to Miami, but came back to Temple Beth Shalom for their daughter's bat mitzvah. You remember that, Sam? The Jewish community works with many interfaith groups in Hollywood. We love to be involved in Hollywood celebrations, just as Hollywood is involved in Jewish community celebrations. Would you believe that in 1973, 4,000 people turned out at the Young Circle Bandshell for Israel's 25th birthday, and Mayor David Keating gave the keynote address. The concept of repairing the world does not limit itself to the confines of Hollywood. In June of 1982, Jerry Spiegelwolf, who grew up in Hollywood and graduated from Nova High School, was killed in Lebanon during the Peace to Galilee. A 24-year-old tank commander serving in the Israeli Defense Forces was inspired to help secure peace in his beloved Israel. On a lighter note, on September 25th, 2019, Metal Sapir received her second lieutenant commission in the Israeli Air Force. Metal was born in Jerusalem, but she lived in Hollywood from the age of 4 years. She was raised by her mom, Debbie Meline, with the help of her grandparents, Audrey and Sam, and was graduated from David Posnack Jewish Day School. Metal will be serving as Human Resource Officer for the Apache Helicopter Base in Mitzpeh Ramon in the Lower Negev. She will be in charge of 80 pilots and 70 auxiliary personnel. She also is helping to secure peace in her beloved Israel. And now I have to call on my technical support, because when I taught school, we didn't have computers, we didn't have PowerPoint, we had library books for kids. So let's see if Cheri can help us.
Well, here's the story. We had pictures on a slideshow that didn't fit on this computer here, so we had them transfer it, and we're gonna do our best to get to the original pictures now. So I went through those. Yes, I remember those at the beginning. And, okay. I mentioned.
Oh, it's right here. All right, so that's when the Temple Sinai moved to our present location of 46th Avenue. And this, of course, is the famous picture when his car broke down, his yellow convertible, and we had to transfer. You transfer the Torahs. You bring them from one home to another. So, pardon?
Oh, scrolls.
Oh, I'm sorry.
The synagogue.
Oh, we make a good team, good. Okay, and Sam's car broke down. You can see Sam, that hair was turning a little gray. The car broke down and he had to take the Torah scrolls out of the back of the convertible and dance it down the street to its new home on 46th Avenue. So, next. Okay, and Sam talked about the missions. We would take many Hollywood residents, and here's our David Keating. Here is David Keating at Hebrew University, and with Otto Schreiber.
Otto Stieber.
Otto Stieber, one of the stalwarts of our
The
federation.
cry on demand.
And here's a picture of us. I talked to you about feeding the homeless. We're down at the outreach center. On one of those Sundays, we're feeding the homeless, and then you see the children are involved also.
That's the new second lieutenant right there.
Okay. All right, and here are Temple Solel's children aiding in the Russian resettlement.
Sparky.
And here we are with our beloved Rabbi Chaim Richter. At that time, we had a chaplaincy committee in our federation that would visit the elderly.
My first job in 1974, when I moved here, was working with Rabbi Richter. I was providing Hebrew classes at the South Florida State Prison for bar mitzvah age boys.
Wow, I didn't know that. And you were working with my parents who worked on the committee also. So he did some wonderful things, and that was community outreach. Here's a picture of Rabbi David Shapiro celebrating his 75th birthday with his beloved wife and his grandson. Okay, and then we have human rights plea. You see the children were always involved. Here's a picture of Jewish Family Service and the Russian resettlement. Okay, and Sam had some speaking engagement with during fellowship week. See if you can find Sam. He's not wearing a clerical collar. I think Marcia Levin, who's in the audience today, she used to write about the happenings in the Hollywood Sun-Tatler.
Skipped over that picture very
You
fast.
skipped right over that picture.
There's March 11.
There she is in the other.
And there's Audrey.
Okay, and there I was too. Oh my! And, some wonderful story about parties in our home.
Yeah.
Okay. This was the tribute to Israel that I was talking about, the 25th birthday, attracting 4,000, and that young man carrying the torch, that the Maccabean torch that was brought into
Young Circle.
Young Circle, just happens to be our nephew, Dr. Scott Snyder. He was president of the Youth Council, that was. I think he served 2 terms. And here is a picture of Jerry C. Wolf that I told you about, who gave his life peace to Galilee. And his parents. And here is Now, we've laughed about Sam with his black hair. This is our first president of the JCC. Mine wasn't he exciting. All right, and this is a picture of affixing the mezuzah that is on the doorpost of the new JCC building. And these were the first 6 presidents of the JCC.
All of which, except one, lives in Hollywood.
Yes, and you can figure out which one is Sam and which one is Ron. Oh, and then we can't forget, because I have this picture here, our phenomenal physicians division, which was part of the federation that Sam
Was
spoke
the
about.
leading physicians division in the entire United States when there's Dr. Alter and
Oh.
Dr. Schoenbaum and Dr. Atkins and Dr. Brazell and Dr. Singer
Baron,
and Dr. Barron
Schneider.
and Dr. Schneider. I mean, they were
Dr. Walter right here.
Right here.
Dr. Alter.
And all Hollywood.
Oh, Hollywood, and we were movers and shakers. Okay. And that is the end of the slide presentation. I have 2 more tasks. One is to call your attention to the wonderful display boards we have, which have all the newspaper clippings from the Hollywood Sun-Tatler and the Jewish Floridian, and you might enjoy looking at that display. And also, if you have,
Yes. Those were created for a Jewish Federation function that celebrated Hollywood. And Audrey and I worked on them, and we've kept them all these years. I think it's been 15 years since that celebration. It was called Hallelujah Hollywood.
And just a few housekeeping chores, and if we are going to have some time, when we finish, I know, my dear, when we finish, not now, but we will have questions and answers. And before, and if we don't have, we'll be walking around. If you have any questions, we hope we have the answers. And if we don't, write it down on the legal pads, and we'll be happy to get back to you with the answers. Or as Ron says, we will fabricate, we will write history or whatever. I hope you've enjoyed this presentation.